This week's show is perhaps a good template for how SNL should handle oddball guests, those without an obvious hook. The writers play to host Madeline Kahn's strengths, making good use of her singing voice, although perhaps a little too often, and letting her be herself. That being said, I think you can see the fatigue starting to creep in towards the end of the season. They'd run a hell of a marathon getting the show off the ground and winning an Emmy, and they were fast on their way to becoming a cultural touchstone of a generation, so it's no surprise they were running on fumes approaching week 24. There are certainly still strong second appearances ahead from Buck Henry and Elliot Gould, but Kahn is probably the last good guest host we got in season 1. Madeline Kahn is an example of how losing a part can turn out to be a boon for the career of an actor. After some work in musicals both on and off Broadway, Kahn was offered the role of Agnes Gooch in 1974's film adaptation of Mamie, but star Lucille Ball did not care for Kahn's portrayal of the role. Kahn was recast, which freed up her schedule to appear in 2 classic comedic films shot that year by director Mel Brooks, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, in which she appeared with fellow first-season host Peter Boyle. Mamie turned out to be a box office and critical dud, effectively ending Ball's film career, while Brooks's 2 films have both been recognized by the Library of Congress and National Film Registry. It's probably on the back of those 2 roles that she appears here on NBC Saturday Night. Both films have been huge commercial successes, and to my knowledge, no filmmaker since Mel Brooks has had 2 movies in the box office top 5 in the same year. That's a hugely successful thing for Kahn to have been a part of, and it doesn't surprise me at all Lorne would want to reach out to Brooks's fans by having her and Boyle on the show. In lieu of a monologue, they have Kahn come out and sing a little ditty in honor of mothers. This is a Mother's Day episode, by the way. She sings it like an acrostic.
M is for the many things she gave me. O is for the other things she gave me.
But then adds an extra P out of nowhere.
P is for the presents that she gave me. Put them all together, they spell mother.
She's adorable, and you can't help but like her, even though this is dippy as hell. Carly Simon makes her first TV appearance in a long time, which is a pre-taped performance. I didn't know this before researching this episode, but Simon has struggled with stage fright most of her career, and has even had panic attacks that have caused her to cancel performances. In a 1987 interview with People magazine, she says, "The paradox of it all is I absolutely love to perform. I never know when it's going to happen, except that the larger the audience, the more I feel I've got to lose." Now when you think of it, a live TV audience of millions is precisely the sort of thing that would trigger anxiety like hers, and I can't blame her one little bit for insisting on recording her performance before the show went live. This makes Simon the first and perhaps only SNL performer to not appear live on the show, unless you count Gerald Ford. She performs 2 songs here, grouped together and not separated by any sketches or commercial breaks. First is Half a Chance, which certainly isn't a bad song, but has a distinct lack of a hummable melody for a single. The chord progression seems purposefully and thoughtfully idiosyncratic, but perhaps not as catchy as some Carly Simon material I've heard. It grew on me, but almost seemed formless at first. You're So Vain is much catchier, of course, being her biggest hit. It's a really clean performance, and the guitarist has an absolutely gorgeous Telecaster, which makes me jealous. This segment is a curio, certainly, but a substantive one. The phone call seems to be setting up some sort of an orgy this week. All right then. I'm Chevy Chase, and you were touching yourself. Might have gotten a few complaints, but I think they were over caring about the minor stuff by this point in the season. They'd already had some good press and knew they were a ratings hit among the key 18 to 24 demographic. The censors had probably been instructed to give them a good bit of slack by now. Wow, Texas is gonna secede, declare itself part of Panama, and name Reagan its king. Most of that barely even seems like a joke these days. The election coverage is pretty brutal, especially the stuff about Ford and Reagan in the primary. You can tell they really find Reagan distasteful already. Chevy warns us medical marijuana may cause short-term memory problems. He reads it twice in a row just to drive the point home. He reminds us to send your cannabis for testing to Chevy, who can't seem to remember the address. Chevy warns us medical marijuana may cause short-term memory problems. He reads it twice in a row just to drive the point home. He reminds us to send your cannabis for testing to Chevy, who can't seem to remember the address. Pretty cute. We have Jane and Kahn in an ad for super absorbent dry hose pantyhose. It's recognizably a takeoff on the famous Bounty paper towel ads, and I have to admit I find it amusing, but boy is it a strange premise. Also, Madeline Kahn sure was a looker. Wow. I'm not trying to be gross or anything, but I found this picture of her in college and I'm kind of blown away. She was stunning. Latella is on about violins on television. These are getting predictable, but that's kind of what SNL does. They enjoy beating jokes to death with the idea that they get more funny the more you overuse them. I agree sometimes, but this particular example is kind of one note. Gilda's cuteness helps, though, as always. We close tonight with News for Cows, in which a literal cow does Garrett's old shtick. The look on Chevy's face as he imitates the cow and smirks at himself makes me irrationally happy. After what could have been a poignant send-off last week, poor Scred, who's upset he's been canceled, talks with Chevy. Scred tries to convince him that the weird god Muppet can get the Beatles on SNL if they'll bring the Land of Gorch back on the show. We get some pretty bad Beatle gags that still make me laugh for some reason, but they should have left the damn felt in the trunk. That would have been a fitting end, but this is just kind of dumb. I suppose it wouldn't be entirely in character for the effing Muppets to end on a high note, though, would it? Gary Weiss's film this week is a montage of New York sights and sounds spliced into Ray Charles's New York's My Home. It's not bad, but as a resident of the 21st century, the choppy edits and jump cuts are quite jarring. Quality editing equipment has gotten much more accessible in 47 years. It's trivial for me to crossfade scenes any number of ways, even using my decade-old Mac, but I'm sure it was much more of a faff for Weiss, who had a razor and splicing tape to work with. Chevy is not Reagan, jamming on the organ with a blues band. He keeps casually referring to Garrett as boy, says he likes to get down with the colored people, and generally acts like an abusive huckster and racist. Garrett gets increasingly annoyed by Reagan disrespecting him until he punches Reagan off his piano bench and into the crowd, where Chevy makes the Saturday Night Live announcement. Pretty nice.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
In which Belushi plays terrible lounge comic Shecky Adams for the entertainment of some woodland creatures. He tells terrible, purposefully hacky jokes to beavers and rabbits. Belushi tries his best here, but this is really dumb and goes on far too long even though it's only a couple minutes. This gets the coveted worst award thing. It is entirely pointless. Bob Wawawa gets her first standalone skit, interviewing Kahn as Marlena Dietrich. The entire gag is the fact that they both have silly speech impediments. If that seems funny to you, this won't be pure torture. Otherwise, it's 3 minutes of growth. The jokes aren't great, but Kahn has had enough theater training to at least maintain her poise regardless of the lackluster material. This one is pretty damn fantastic, probably one of my favorite sketches of the season. It's also the first time I think all 3 of the ladies have featured in a skit with the host without any of the guys. The closest that comes to mind is the construction worker skit with Lily Tomlin, but Danny was at least a prop in that one. The girls are all having a sleepover at Gilda's house, staying up late and talking about sex. Kahn plays the knowledgeable one, telling the others about how the whole thing works and of course getting most of it wrong. Gilda is adorable and kind of heartbreaking as she describes what her sister told her.
My sister told me she heard that there was this girl that this guy jumped out of the bushes and forced her to have a baby. How? I don't know, he just said, have a baby right now.
It's such an innocent way to describe something as awful as a rape, and it rings true to what I know about how kids think. Anyway, this one has lots of great one-liners, and the crowd really seems to love them.
And then you scream, and then he screams, and then it's over.
That's disgusting!
Kahn is really strong here, and the girls play well off of her and each other. The ending is perfect and shows the show wasn't always afraid of ending on a joke.
Well, don't worry. We'll never have to keep this pact because I know I'll never do it.
Me neither. Me neither.
I might.
Garrett has a somewhat shaky accent as Namibia's ambassador, appealing to the audience for their fondue sets. That's a pretty damned dated gag, but I briefly worked at a melting pot restaurant, so for some dumb reason it made me giggle. Here we have the obligatory Young Frankenstein parody, played as a musical. It hits all of the notes, of course, but it's hard to make a parody of something as funny as that film and not have it come off as somehow less funny. Kahn's singing voice is lovely, though, as she sings I Feel Pretty. I've never been a big fan of huge operatic sopranos, but there's no denying this type of singing is impressive. Worth noting that Young Frankenstein actually was made into a musical in 2007 with the wonderful Megan Mullally in Kahn's role. I'll bet that was a hoot. In which Kahn is a not very happy Pat Nixon writing in her diary about how much she hates her husband and revels in his misery. Aykroyd plays a strong B+ Nixon here, and Chevy and Gilda play his kids as utter dolts. There's some great material of Nixon yelling at portraits of Kennedy and Lincoln.
Kennedy, you always looked so good. They're gonna find out about you someday, though. Oh, yes. Yes, having sex with women, the president, within these very walls. That never happened when Dick Nixon was in the White House. Never.
Belushi gets to be Kissinger, and he looks frankly bored shitless. This is decent topical comedy, but not the kind of thing that he would have been overly excited to be included in. Jeez, Nixon calls Kissinger Jew boy twice. Then Pat goes on a diatribe about the difference between, well, two different slurs for Asian people. I'm not going to repeat them. This is just another example of them putting offensively racist jokes into the mouths of racists, thus somehow getting it past the censors as some sort of commentary. I think O'Donoghue, in particular, just liked racist jokes, though. This one goes on a bit long, but I still enjoy it. They're already padding the show somewhat with all the musical numbers, so I can't blame them for milking this one a little. They work in Garrett, playing Sammy Davis Jr. as a complete and total buffoon. It's the least subtle impression I've ever seen of anyone, and I'm totally here for it. 99.5% Garrett just chewing the shit out of the scenery and 0.5% actual Sammy Davis impression. This could have easily been left out of, and probably should have been left out of the skit, but I'm glad they didn't. The final Abe Lincoln gag is wonderful.
Abe, what's happening? I can't believe it. Why me, Abe, of all people? Why me?
Because you're such a dip.
However, I thought Abe was saying dick, which would have made sense. Turned out they'd originally written the line that way, then as schmuck, a Yiddish term for penis, but the censors made them change it again to dip. That seems like a pretty pointless edit, but I guess you couldn't use euphemisms for penis on TV in those days. The N-word was fine, though. Jeez. This one honestly flies right over my head because I'm not a theater geek. A parody of the musical A Trip to Chinatown, it starts with Belushi as a PI on the phone making a vaguely racist joke about a Chinese tailor. My guess is that this one's just an excuse to let Kahn sing some more, which is certainly a strong suit for her. They'd have fewer Broadway and otherwise music-oriented hosts going forward, and they always present unique challenges when they do decide to try it. Looking at you, Frank Zappa. Both she and Belushi do a great job with the singing, but this sketch doesn't really do anything for me. Gilda and Madeline do impressions. Madeline gives us baby eating ice cream for the first time, and Gilda does parakeet learning first word, which is adorable and ends with Kahn throwing a blanket over Gilda's head to shut her up. I had a grin ear to ear for this entire segment, so well done. Kahn drops the pretense of a skit and just sings Lost in the Stars. It's a beautiful rendition, but very much the sort of thing I couldn't see making it on the show in just a few short years' time. Boy howdy though, is it a step up from Raquel Welch's awful warbling the previous week. This may seem uncharitable of me, but Kahn is a tremendously talented lady who happened to be beautiful, whereas Welch was sexy and managed to convince people she was talented because of that. There's a difference. We have an uncharacteristically bad Edie Baskin photo this week, which makes poor Madeline look like Tim Burton-era Joker. I don't know how you can take a picture of Kahn that isn't radiant, so that's a swing and a miss, Edie. Kahn was actually meant to have hosted earlier in the season, but a technician strike had derailed that week's show, and Kahn merely came to the studio to do a taped introduction for a repeat of the Richard Pryor episode. I'm glad she got a chance to make it up, though, because I genuinely did end up enjoying this one. Kahn's a true professional, and she seemed to give her all, even if, as she later said in interviews, she hadn't felt entirely comfortable. She took what she described as an almost clinical approach to the work, at least this first time hosting, and didn't feel as if she fit in. However, the cast greeted her warmly for the final credits, and you can tell that even if they didn't fall in love with her, they appreciated working with someone who took the pressure off of them and showed up to work. It wouldn't be long before Belushi at least became difficult for the hosts to handle, especially the more professional ones, but even he seemed to have affection for Kahn, telling her "you were wonderful" as the credits began to roll. This was a pleasant installment, but unfortunately next week sees a steep step down in terms of quality. Maybe it's me, but host Diane Cannon has never entertained me in anything, and her turn as host is no exception. There's some quality moments nonetheless, so stay tuned.